everybody, and welcome to the Dissecting Fiction podcast. I'm Vinny Murphy. And today we're going to take just a little bit of time, probably, to talk about the new Mortal Kombat movie, being that we talked about the last two. Just wanted to do kind of a companion piece to that, and I think it'll be an interesting discussion. The film came out in 2021, a little different for depending on where you are. April 8th for most international territories, April 23rd in the U.S., and the U.S. also was one of the areas where it was available on HBO Max. I think, I may be wrong, HBO Max might not be available anywhere outside of North America right now, but there are kind of comparable services. But regardless, the film was put onto the service without any extra charge. Crew-wise, we have Simon McQuoid directing. I literally found no credits other than advertising work prior to the film. On the screenplay, we have Oren Uziel. I think I'm saying that right, Uziel. A lot of scripts under his belt. 22 Jump Street. Had actually worked on the Mortal Kombat Legacy TV show. Cloverfield Paradox, probably the next biggest thing that he's known for. He co-wrote that initial story with Greg Russo, who, another one very light on credits, couldn't really find much else. It seems like he may have some unproduced things. Screenplay probably mostly finished by David Callahan. David Callahan, kind of all over the place for years now, about 20. Worked on The Expendables, worked on the WB Godzilla, Ant-Man, Zombieland. A lot of rewrites under his belt. And interestingly, the writer of the Shang-Chi script for Disney, which has some similar elements. We can talk about that a little bit. But he's kind of all over the place, and he's currently working on Into the Spider-Verse 2, whatever that may be, and the live-action Hercules for Disney. So David Callahan probably the most significant writer on that script. We come into it largely a cast of relative unknowns or TV actors. Short running time, 110 minutes. Budget of $55 million with an eventual box office of $79.7 million. That's still going as we record this, but not a great indicator, but also an incredibly strange time to release a movie.
This was caught in the awkward COVID pandemic where it was supposed to come out last year, but then didn't. And then it was supposed to come out in theaters, and then didn't, and then it also did. It's been a weird time. I saw this personally at home with my friends while drinking a beer, and so the movie just seemed fine to me that way. But I've seen a lot of people get really upset about this movie. I'm not really sure why.
It's funny. I saw it twice in about 24 hours. I watched it at home, knowing that I was going to see it in a drive-in theater, I should say, and kind of knowing that the picture quality and the sound quality wasn't going to be great with that experience. So I just kind of wanted to see it if I was going to have to talk about it. I don't love it. I don't hate it. We can kind of get into that. I think it has an interesting place in the three films. I would say the two times I watched it straight through, and I've kind of jumped in and watched some scenes, it did move quick enough as far as I was concerned. The plot is kind of nonsensical, which is not a great thing to be able to say in comparison to the original Mortal Kombat, which is just kind of goofy, but it's a bizarre script that is trying to build the franchise. It is all attempted world building, but all of that world building is really sloppy. There's definitely an attempt to shift the focus off of the heroes from the original film and onto Sub-Zero and Scorpion, which I think in a certain respect is fair, being that they are the more iconic figures, but it's this bizarre imbalance of trying to make something very superhero-y and also be fan servicey. And I think a lot of the fan service kind of falls on deaf ears, because I think a lot of the people watching simply won't get the little references that they try to make.
Well, yeah, I've seen a couple YouTube videos, and a lot of people were kind of, it seemed to me, upset that some of the more fan favorite characters were killed off. I did see a lot of, I really like Kano in this film. I really did like the subplot with Scorpion and Sub-Zero. I think those first 7 minutes are really good. And I think that's why, like, when they were advertising this movie, they showed off that first 7 minutes, because it makes this film seem like it's going to be something else than it actually is. And what it actually is kind of, a bunch of fight scenes. And, they just establish people's goals really simply. It kind of feels more like like watching an episode of like wrestling, and the 4 hours where they're just coming on, saying they want this, the other guy wants that, and then they beat each other up. There wasn't really much else going on there. I do agree with you with like the sloppy world building. The way they make Otherworld look like is like they shot in that Power Rangers like rock quarry and then just put a blue filter over it. They didn't really do as much as they could have, like making that other world seem, weird and spooky and all that. They just kind of chose the cheapest possible options sometimes, and that was a little worrying. But besides that, I enjoyed the film. I think a lot of people took this film too seriously because of the way they advertised this.
I think there's this weird expectation. Ultimately, I can't act like it's a good movie. Like, I can't sit here and think that it's really a good movie. I thought the fights all looked really good. I thought they did a really wonderful job on the costuming. Production design, as you said, often very bland. And it's funny you say the Power Rangers thing, because also shooting in Australia, like most of modern Western Power Rangers shows shoot their sequences, it was just odd and imbalanced, and I thought the whole thing about the arcana of them having to unlock their abilities and only being able to take that from other quote-unquote champions, like, it's already kind of silly. Do we really need to have this weird explanation that ultimately is meaningless? Because you end up having Scorpion makes no sense in that sense if it's about shifting the champions, and if you're going to accept a world where there's a giant tournament and other dimensions, I think you can accept the fact that people would be able to train enough to develop powers.
Yeah, see, I thought that was just part of like the games and stuff. Like, oh, that makes sense. Some people are chosen and some people aren't. That's why there's like a robot dude and a ninja guy. Like, they're just kind of randomly chosen. I
No.
mean, like, in those first few films, they just kind of fell into the tournament. I can understand that impulse to be like, well, they were destined for this tournament because, like, you have to justify the character's existence somehow. Those plot lines were, like, kind of pointless because nobody really needed that outside of Sonya, which, like, I don't think she even really needed to do, because isn't, like, Jax just kind of wander into the tournament anyway?
Yeah, it does stray pretty far from the plot of the games, which is funny. We talked about this last time. The original movie really didn't. Even arguably, Annihilation was still fairly close to the plot line of the games. This was them trying to reframe it, which I think is fine if they had done a better job of it. I just don't know how else to put it. And it's, the gimmick here, and I think the thing that they were betting on was the violence, the fact that, they could do the fatalities, that they could do, pretty vicious fights, unlike the first two films. The problem is no one talks about that, which means that it's not bad. They did a good job on it as far as it being feeling natural, but it also didn't seem to add anything. And I think that's a huge comment on this movie in general, is you had a lot of stuff going on. You had some intentionally obscure characters, some intentionally not obscure characters from the series, planting a lot of seeds of who could get killed. Like the fact that Kung Lao does, spoiler, the fact that Kung Lao does die this early, leads you to believe, like, okay, now we have a little bit of uncertainty, which I think is maybe the most positive thing that they plant. But they also very much refer to something from the games, which is no one really dies. You end up in the Nether Realm, and maybe you end up evil and a monstery version of yourself, or maybe you get turned back, or maybe you have a thing like Scorpion where you're kind of like a specter running around. It was just a lot of trouble to me to kind of accomplish nothing on that end. And like I said, little things like fan service, like Reiko, whom I assume probably 90% of the audience, even those familiar with the games, thought was made up for the movie, trying to look like Shao Kahn is like a nod to the games, but like he also was pointless. Like as was pretty much Raiden and Shang Tsung in this. Like you really have Cole, your new character, becomes much of the focus, and Sonya. Outside of that, I agree. Kano is probably your best character. I think Kung Lao is pretty close. I thought he was pretty well portrayed and interesting, but no one gets a ton of screen time.
No, besides maybe like Scorpion and Sub-Zero, they were certainly like, I guess, through line through all of this, which, considering how they don't have much impact on the greater world, it was just kind of like a weird rivalry. I do see the superhero comparison you made earlier, because it does feel a bit like, in that sense, like a superhero origin. Like, they had to get revenge for X thing. It felt very like 90s, like the Crow-ish in that way.
Oh yeah, definitely. And I think even on the other side that you have characters unlocking their powers, like it's as much a 2021 movie as it can be. It's trying to build a franchise like they do in the MCU. It's trying to plant all these seeds, and I think it's almost defeating, where this could have been almost, as dumb as this sounds for a movie about going to another dimension to fight in a tournament, it could have been a lot more deliberate. It could have just been a lot more direct, and I think they really shot themselves in the foot by not sort of building their characters, as opposed to trying to build this world that ultimately they kind of go back and forth on anyway. Like, there's one point where they say that these are all the champions, and then the stinger at the end of the movie is that they're going to go look for more champions. It's like, well, you just told me everyone's here, and what is this Arcana thing anyway? And like, how it doesn't actually make much sense. It's just messy, and I don't mind watching it for the fights, but it's ultimately almost anything on this earth that was filmed with a budget is better than Annihilation. So it's the second best Mortal Kombat film, but I think the original is still a better movie.
Yeah, I think I agree. I think that's kind of where this is going to fall on like the scale of Mortal Kombat movies of all three. But like I think the way I look at this, I enjoyed this more than Godzilla versus King Kong, because I at least felt like there was some like coherency going on, while like Godzilla versus King Kong threw out a million other things. And the reason I'm comparing those two is because those have been the last like two big budget movies of like the last 2 months, and now it's going to be like Cruella and whatever else is coming out this summer. But yeah, kind of looking back on it, I do see how this is trying to build a franchise, and how those trappings are what really kind of drag this film down, because it is trying to build this world, but it's also not really invested in the world, because you got to make room for all these changes you're going to make, because they will make changes, because this shit, that's how always this shit works out. Like, Marvel's been doing that for like the last 15 years. I don't know. I mean, I enjoyed it. I think you kind of have to just step back and just watch it with like a beer in hand or something, because the fight scenes in this are like genuinely good. And I think that's kind of got where most of my entertainment from.
Yeah, and I would agree. And I think that is something that, you're correct. To me also, I would hold over Godzilla vs. Kong, which is Godzilla vs. Kong has sequences with fights that are interrupted by nonsensical plot points. And at bare minimum, this doesn't try to develop as much and does have enough fights. But, I think the weakness of that, too, is something like Goro showing up to fight Cole. Like, Goro in the original film is made to be a big deal, is built that way. And in this one, it's like one shot beforehand where everyone seems intimidated by him, and then he shows up and he's just sort of a gag. Like, he is literally just a special effect in this. And that is where I think they kind of wasted, this hour and a half or so. It shouldn't be longer than an hour and a half, maybe, but you could have gotten a lot more done. And, the Cole character, people had a problem with that, of them, like, inserting a character into the story. I don't think that's so much of an issue, considering that it's supposed to be some sort of tournament, which we never get to see in this film either. But, ultimately, he also doesn't serve much purpose, because we're being told as much outside of his view as we are from it. It's just a kind of generally weak cool fights, cool costumes.
Yeah, I think that's about all you can say about it, because there's not much else. I'm sure this is going to be some weird, like, behind-the-scenes stuff that's going to come out in, like, a year or two where, like, they finished filming and then some executive showed up and said, you have to change all of it because we're making this, and this. And you were like, well, I just shot all of this. That's kind of what I get the feeling of, like, behind the scenes on this film.
Yeah, I would agree, but I think you're right. I don't think there's much else to say about this. If you've enjoyed the show, please check us out on social media. Just type Dissecting Fiction into pretty much any search engine. Combine it with any of the different platforms you enjoy. We're on most of them. We're also going to be updating the website with a bunch of the past episodes, etc., in the coming weeks, so be on the look for that. As always, support your local businesses. That's getting easier to do, which is nice. If you're in the market for some toys, statues, things of that nature, check out toystoreguide.com. They will hook you up with some of the best in your area. Christian, anything else?
In the vein of fighting games and fighting universes, I'm going to recommend Injustice, because that is kind of a neat, like, DC universe in of itself. I think the comics are still online. I know they took them offline, like the third season, quote-unquote, offline. Also, the games are just kind of neat, so check out some of Injustice. It's basically DC, but all 90s and fucked up, like all the characters are murderers. It's cool in that way, but like it also is just a fun fighting game, yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of rumors of where that franchise might be going. Something very interesting popping up that I don't know if I believe that it perhaps might end up a Marvel versus DC title. I think that's unlikely. We'll see what happens. But then again, Disney has shown to be getting more liberal with their licensing for video games. So a little bit of evidence, I guess. But other than that, I'm Vinnie Murphy.
And I'm Christian Kalik.
And thanks for listening.